Hello, my friend. It is I, Optimus Prime. I have been hoping to talk with you again. You are still awake, yes? Oh, good. For a moment I thought you might have fallen asleep, while Bumblebee, Ironhide, and I were getting settled outside. I'm glad you're awake, because I've been looking forward to talking with you. I don't know if anyone has told you this before, but you are a good listener. You are also a good friend. Thank you for allowing me and my Autobot allies to rest outside your home. You not only provided us with a safe place to stay, but you also helped settle a disagreement between Bumblebee and Ironhide. I shall explain. Today in our vehicle modes, Bumblebee, Ironhide, and I were on a mission. You may have heard the news about heavy rains, rising waters, and flooding that caused a bridge to wash out. My allies and I delivered building materials and emergency supplies to help people who live near the bridge. Fortunately, all the people are safe, and the bridge is now repaired. But after our mission, we had been driving for several hours when night began to fall. We knew we would need to find a rest place and recharge our energy cells. Bumblebee suggested that we might stay at a truck stop or at a rest area next to the highway, but Ironhide disagreed. Ironhide thought a truck stop or any place near a highway would be too noisy, and he proposed that we go to a wrecking yard or a large parking lot. I thought Bumblebee and Ironhide had both offered good suggestions, but before I could tell them that, they began to argue. I should point out that they did not raise their voices or sound angry. After all, they have been friends for a very long time, and it's not unusual for friends, even good friends, to disagree when they have different opinions. But still, they could not agree. Bumblebee said his idea was better, because truck stops and rest areas are often close to highways, and that being close to a highway would allow us to roll out quickly if necessary. Ironhide said his idea was better, because we could conceal ourselves among many more vehicles. They began to criticize each other's suggestions. And then Bumblebee said, "Well, I believe you get the idea." They continued arguing because they simply could not reach an agreement. As I mentioned earlier, friends can have different opinions. But that is not a bad thing at all. Because imagine what the world would be like if everyone had the same opinions, the same interests, the same likes and dislikes, and the same beliefs. If everyone agreed about everything, would individuals ever be able to change their own minds? And if people were incapable of changing their minds and opinions, how could they learn from their mistakes? How could they ever improve themselves? Which is why I think our differences, including differences of opinions, are a very good thing. Our differences are wondrous and fascinating because they make each individual unique. However, as much as I appreciate that friends have their differences, when I heard Bumblebee and Ironhide arguing, I could not help wondering why both were being so stubborn. I thought that because they were tired, perhaps they were also irritable and impatient. But I wished they could have heard themselves and also really listened to each other. After all, they both had the same goal: to find a place where we could rest for the night. I believe they would have accomplished their goal if they had been better listeners and had a discussion instead of an argument. I did not interrupt Bumblebee and Ironhide, or attempt to offer my own suggestions, because I thought it was important for them to work things out, to come up with a solution on their own. But as they continued to argue, I began to wonder if they would ever reach an agreement. And it was at that very moment when you contacted me. I wish you could have seen their reaction when I told them about your invitation. Bumblebee and Ironhide immediately stopped arguing. They looked surprised, and their faces brightened. Both were so happy about the unexpected opportunity to visit you, they forgot all about their disagreement. They knew, as I did, we would be more comfortable staying with you next to your home. Ironhide said, "We can be there in just a few minutes." Bumblebee revved his engine and said, "Let's get going." And we came straight here. Ever since my allies and I arrived on Earth, we have done our best to help humanity. However, in our experience, many humans still become alarmed at the sight of Autobots, and do not understand that we are living, sentient beings as well. Whenever a human offers to help us, we are especially grateful. Bumblebee, Ironhide, and I appreciate your kindness, and we greatly value your friendship. I am glad that we have this time together. Talking about my friends, their differences, as well as our mission to help rebuild a bridge, makes me remember something. Something that happened long ago on my own home planet, Cybertron. It is a story about a friend of mine. A friend with whom I did not always agree. And a bridge. A bridge that we built together. I have never told this story before, but I hope you will enjoy it. Oh, I realize you may be feeling tired. Please feel free to relax and close your eyes while I do my best to tell you our story. Now, I believe you have some knowledge of the history of Cybertron. But before I tell the story about my friend and the bridge that we built, I hope you won't mind if I go over a few details. Because this story begins millions of years ago, during a period known as the Golden Age, a time when Cybertron was rich with energy, and all the bots who lived on the planet were at peace with each other. It was also a time when I was very, very young. Although Cybertron was an entirely mechanical and technological world, with metal cities, plains, and mountains, Cybertronian society had much in common with cities on your own planet. Our cities had towering skyscrapers, educational systems, museums, parks, and recreation centers. For many years I lived in the city of Iacon, where I worked as a data clerk at the vaults in the Hall of Records. At the vaults, my duty was to collect, analyze, organize, and store data from all over Cybertron. One day at the vaults, a Cybertronian with a white metal body walked in and approached my workstation. Although I did not know him very well, I recognized him as the bot Jetfire. Jetfire was a scientist and an engineer with an interest in construction. He was about my age, but unlike me, he had jets and thrusters that enabled him to fly. He was also larger than the average Cybertronian. His entire body looked new, without a single dent or any evidence of repairs to his plating. I recalled that he had a reputation for modifying his own components and creating new technology to improve himself. Jetfire requested data about the construction of the ancient Benevolus Bridge, a pedestrian bridge that extended over a deep chasm. The bridge connected a residential complex to a public park named the Alpha Preserve, which had beautiful metal gardens and tall, ancient sculptures. Because the residential complex contained my own living quarters, I was very familiar with the bridge, which I often used to visit the park. I gave the data to Jetfire and asked him if he required any additional information about the Benevolus Bridge. He replied, "No, I only require data for the bridge's construction so that I can learn how to take it apart." Jetfire's statement surprised me. I said, "For millions of years, countless Cybertronians have relied on that bridge so that they can visit the Alpha Preserve. Why must you learn how to take the bridge apart?" Jetfire told me that the Iacon City Building Council had assigned him to analyze the bridge. He had determined that 3 large sections of the bridge's superstructure had become weak and unstable, and that the bridge would soon collapse. He had decided the best solution was to dismantle the bridge immediately. I understood the safety reasons for taking down the bridge, but I wondered how bots would reach the park if the bridge were gone. I asked Jetfire if he planned to replace the old bridge with a new one. He told me he did not see any need to replace the bridge, and that bots with flight capabilities could continue to visit the park without any difficulty. I replied, "But not all bots are capable of flying. The Alpha Preserve is important because it offers a peaceful, quiet place to rest and enjoy nature. Don't you think all bots should be able to visit the park whenever they wish?" I proposed to Jetfire that he and I should work together. I volunteered to help him recycle and restore parts of the old bridge, and to obtain construction materials for a new and improved bridge. A bridge that would be safe and strong. I waited for Jetfire to respond. He was quiet for several seconds. I could not tell what he was thinking. I wondered if he might tell me that I should communicate my concerns about the bridge to the building council. I wondered if he had ever visited the Alpha Preserve himself and rested in the colorful metal gardens in the shadows of the giant sculptures. When Jetfire finally spoke, He said, "I apologize for not being more considerate. All bots should have access to the park. I shall inform the building council that you and I will work together to build a new bridge." And that is how Jetfire and I became friends. I appreciated that Jetfire changed his mind about replacing the bridge, that he was adaptable, and that he had accepted my offer to help. Right away, we went to work. We placed wide barriers on both sides of the bridge to prevent anyone from traveling across it, and installed scaffolding made of sheet metal and metal bars below and around the bridge. Scaffolding was a temporary structure that gave us something to stand on while we dismantled the bridge and removed the sections that were beyond repair. Because Jetfire was a scientist and engineer, he knew about many types of metal that were used for the construction of bridges and other structures. After he analyzed the data that I had given him about the Benevolus Bridge, he learned that the original builders had not used heat-treated metal for various sections. He explained how heat could be used to make metal stronger and also reduce the risk of the metal becoming brittle. Heat-treated metal was also easier to shape and cut, and would allow us to replace the damaged sections faster. We worked quickly but carefully as we handled out the old brittle sections, making sure that the pieces did not fall into the chasm below the bridge. Examining the sections, Jetfire said he was surprised that the Benevolus Bridge had remained standing for so long. He used his own built-in torch to weld and strengthen the new metal sections. 7 days later, we finished cutting and installing the last of the new sections, and took down the scaffolding. After we removed the barriers from each side of the bridge, Jetfire said, "Our work is done. I must proceed to my next assignment." But just as Jetfire prepared to fly away, a voice cried out, asking him to stop. Jetfire and I turned to face an elderly bot with a faded gray body, who stood with a group of several others. They gathered beside a metal utility shed outside the nearby residential complex. The gray bot shuffled over and reached out to us, grasping our hands. The other bots followed close behind. The gray bot said, "You cannot leave until my neighbors and I thank you for restoring the bridge. When we saw the barriers go up, we feared the bridge would be destroyed, and that we would no longer be able to visit the park. For your good work, we cannot thank you enough." Then, the gray bot and his neighbors moved forward onto the bridge's walkway, heading for the park. Before I could express my own gratitude to Jetfire, he fired his thrusters and launched, rising fast and away, past a cluster of skyscrapers. In the years that followed, I encountered Jetfire numerous times at construction sites and scientific events in Iacon City. Once I asked if he had ever returned to the Benevolus Bridge so that he could inspect the work that we had done together. Without sounding proud, as if he were merely stating a fact, he said, "We have no need to inspect it. We built that bridge to last." And indeed, the bridge remained standing for a long, long time. But then, something very unexpected happened. Something that brought Cybertron's golden age to an end. A bot named Megatron started a revolution on Cybertron. Megatron and his followers became known as the Decepticons. They wanted to take control of Cybertron. I was among the bots who objected, and we formed our own faction, the Autobots. The Decepticons and Autobots could not agree on a peaceful solution. It was a war between good and evil. Friends became enemies, and soon Cybertron was a battle zone. One day, I learned that Decepticons and Autobots had engaged in a fight near the Benevolus Bridge. I did not know how or why the fight started, nor did I know who won the fight. When I arrived at the bridge, the Decepticons and Autobots had already gone, but I saw clear evidence of their conflict. Someone had used an energy weapon to blast through a section of the bridge's walkway, leaving a wide hole with sharp, jagged edges. As I moved onto the bridge to inspect the damage, a familiar bot descended from the sky and came to a hovering stop a few feet above the hole. The bot was Jetfire. He wore an emblem on his chest that indicated he had joined the Decepticons. Still hovering, he gazed at me in silence. I wondered if he had participated in the fight at the bridge, and if he were responsible for the wide hole in the walkway. And then I thought, perhaps Jetfire is wondering the same thing about me, if I might be responsible for the damage. I held out my hand so Jetfire could see that I was not holding a weapon, and told him, I have no wish to fight you, Jetfire. I also do not wish for anyone, either Decepticon or Autobot, to get hurt while trying to cross this bridge. Jetfire remained silent as he kept his eyes fixed on me. I pointed to the utility shed that stood near the residential complex. I continued. The walls from that shed could be hammered into flat sheets to cover the hole in the walkway. I believe I can do this job myself, but it will get done faster if we work together. Turning away from Jetfire, I went to the utility shed, lifted the entire structure, and carried it onto the bridge. As I began breaking down the shed and removing its walls, I looked back at Jetfire. He was kneeling beside the hole, using his hands to flatten out the sharp bits of shredded metal at the hole's edges. I flattened two of the shed's walls into a single large sheet and handed it to Jetfire. He positioned the sheet over the hole and used his torch to weld the sheet into place. We repeated this process, adding another layer of sheet metal to cover the damaged section. And then, our work was done. I looked around, scanning the area to confirm that Jetfire and I were alone. I said, "We may have our differences, Jetfire, but I hope you believe me when I say I shall always think of you as a friend." Jetfire replied, "I believe you," and then he launched away, leaving me to wonder how many other Decepticons might be capable of goodness. I walked across the bridge, not just to make sure it was safe, but because I wanted to see the Alpha Preserve, which I had not visited in a long time. Because the battles between the Autobots and Decepticons had left many places in ruins. I felt great relief when I arrived at the park's entrance and found the sculptures intact and undamaged. The metal flowers in the gardens were also untouched and as colorful as ever. I wish I could have stayed a while longer, but my allies were waiting for me elsewhere, so I had to move on. In the years that followed, I lost track of Jetfire. Eventually, my fellow Autobots and I were forced to abandon Cybertron, and we traveled to Earth. A number of Decepticons made the same journey, but I have yet to learn what became of Jetfire. Wherever he may be, I am certain he can take care of himself. Although he joined the Decepticons, it's important for me to remember that Jetfire was adaptable and not inflexible in his thoughts and beliefs. On the day when he asked me for data about the Benevolus Bridge, he did not believe there was any reason to replace or restore the bridge. But when I encouraged him to consider how others depended on the bridge, he listened, and he changed his mind. I imagine it's possible that Jetfire could also change his mind about being a Decepticon. But no matter what path he chooses, I will always remember how we formed a friendship when we built that bridge together. Sometimes, on nights like tonight, my thoughts return to the Alpha Preserve on Cybertron, where I spent so many hours in my youth. Even though the park was in a city, surrounded by gleaming skyscrapers and building complexes, whenever I went to the park, I felt as if I were far away, in a different place. A peaceful, quiet place. I remember the park so well that when I close my eyes, I can see its tall metal sculptures as if I were resting there now. The sculptures were very old, created long before my spark brought me to life. Other parks on Cybertron featured statues of historic figures and heroes, but the sculptures in the Alpha Preserve were different. The sculptures were shapes that were strange and beautiful at the same time. Most of the sculptures were designed with moving parts and sections. Some parts were angular, shaped like triangles and squares, but many more were curved pieces, shaped like ovals, circles, discs, and arcs. When seasonal winds traveled through the city, the winds would make their way through channels between the skyscrapers, channels that delivered the winds to the park. These winds made the moving parts of the sculptures slowly shift and rotate. As I rested in the park, surrounded by the shining sculptures with their moving sections, I could practically feel the distant stars as their light danced across the middle gardens. It was such a wonderful, peaceful feeling. As I think about the park, and about the bridge that I built with Jetfire, I realize that memories are also something like a bridge. A bridge that connects us with the past and with all our yesterdays. I hope you enjoyed this story about my friends, but now we must get a good night's rest. I feel very lucky that our journey brought us to you once again. I am looking forward to tomorrow and to talking with you again soon. Good night, my friend.